If you're approaching 65 years old, you're probably getting a lot of phone calls from people trying to sell you Medicare plans. You're also probably getting your mailbox stuffed every day with a lot of offer letters, postcards, things like that, hooking you into different Medicare plans. Now, here's the thing. It would be simple if it was just as easy as signing up for Medicare, but when it comes to Medicare, there's a couple different routes you can go and lots of different options with plans. So how do you decide which one is best for you? And most importantly, how do you know what each one will cost? Hi, I'm Erika Smiley, and I'm one of the lead educators here at MedicareSchool.com, and we help educate people on all things Medicare. We also are a brokerage where you can call in and talk to our guides who are very experienced. That's all they do all day long is Medicare, and they can help talk you through kind of the complicated maze of Medicare, figure out which plans are going to be best for you and your unique situation. Now, it's interesting. I was recently at my parents' house. I don't watch a lot of cable TV, but my parents were watching TV, and this commercial came on, and it was crazy. It was like a 2-minute long commercial, and it kept saying, "Call now. There may be Medicare plans available in your zip code. Call now. There may be Medicare plans available in your zip code." And this commercial just kept running over and over again. So, of course, there's Medicare plans available in your zip code, right? But there's a lot of different kinds of plans. There's original Medicare, there's supplemental plans, and lots of different variations of those. There's Advantage plans. In this video today, we're going to look at 5 different directions you could go when you're setting up your Medicare and your Medicare plans. And if you stick around to the end of the video, there's a special group of people who have another option as well and a different direction you can take. So let's look at 5 different directions you could go with setting up Medicare and your Medicare plans in this video, and we're going to break down what each one could cost you. So first, we're going to look at original Medicare, okay? So just plain original Medicare. Then we're going to look at original Medicare plus a supplemental plan. Now, I know there's different supplemental plans out there, but the most popular are the G plan and the N plan. So today we're going to look at original Medicare with a G plan and a Part D drug plan added with it. And then we'll look at original Medicare with an N plan and a Part D drug plan with it. Then we're going to also look at Medicare Advantage plans. And then lastly, we'll look at Medicare Advantage plans with a Copay Protection plan added in. That may be one you guys don't know about. So we're going to talk about these 5 today and kind of compare cost and see what each one might look like for you. Okay, so before we start looking at costs, let's go into just a little review, a refresher of what some of these are, right? You may be watching this video and maybe you know a lot about Medicare, but maybe you're brand new to this and you don't even know what is original Medicare, what is a supplement, what is an Advantage plan. Okay, so just as a review, original Medicare is made up of Part A and Part B. So Part A is going to be the hospital and inpatient coverage, okay? So if you're in the hospital, if you're in skilled nursing facility, inpatient care like that. It may also cover any medications or drugs that are administered while you're inpatient in one of those facilities, okay? Now for most Americans, if you've worked for 40 quarters, which is 10 years of your life, and paid into the system, you're going to get Part A for $0. So it's a $0 premium if you or your spouse has worked for 40 quarters or 10 years and paid into the system, okay? Now, Part B is more of your outpatient coverage, so it's going to be doctors visits, things like durable medical equipment, medications that may be administered like in a doctor's outpatient setting. So Part B is more outpatient. And for the average American right now, the base premium price is $185 a month. Now I say the average because there is something called an IRMA, and an IRMA is an income-related monthly adjusted amount. That's if you're a high earner. So if you're in a bracket, if you're single and you made more than $106,000, if you're married and filed jointly and made more than $212,000, then they could charge you more for your Part B. And how they're going to figure that out, they're going to look 2 years back, okay? So for the 2025 IRMA, if you had one, they would have looked back at 2023 and said, okay, this person's modified adjusted gross income was over our threshold here, so they're going to pay more. And there's different levels of those IRMAs. We won't get into all that today, but the base price for most Americans for Part B is going to be $185. Okay, so now original Medicare is one option, but it's not a great option because there's a lot of gaps in Medicare. There's actually 6 gaps in original Medicare. There's 3 on the A side and there's 3 on the B side. And when I say gaps, I mean financial gaps of things original Medicare does not cover. Things you would be responsible for if you just had Medicare on your own. And one of the most concerning of those is a 20% co-insurance. So a lot of people don't know Medicare pays 80% and you would be on the hook for 20%, which is a lot, right? So because Medicare has a lot of financial gaps, it's good insurance, but it's not great comprehensive insurance. People go 2 directions usually. They either add a supplemental plan or a Medigap plan to original Medicare. And the most popular of these right now are the G plan and the N plan. Okay, so you might have heard of a G plan or an N plan. Those are supplemental plans, also known as Medigap plans. And so those plans, they work with original Medicare. Wherever they accept original Medicare, they'll accept your supplemental plan. There's no networks with these. You can go to any doctor in the whole country that accepts original Medicare. I think that's about 98% of doctors. So it gives you a lot of freedom. Also, you don't have many prior authorizations at all. You don't have to worry about referrals. If you want to see a specialist, you can just book and go right to the specialist. So the Medigap plans, they're pretty comprehensive. You do pay monthly for those, and we'll get into what those costs are. But outside of that, depending on what plan you have, if you have a G plan, all you pay is a $257 deductible, and you're covered for everything for the rest of the year. So those are the supplemental Medigap plans. Now, those don't come with drug coverage, so if you go this route, you have to add a Part D drug plan. So we'll talk about the cost of that as well. Now, people who decide not to go the supplemental route, they might go the Medicare Advantage route. So if you heard of Advantage plans, they're pretty heavily marketed. That's people calling you on the phone and sending you the stuff in the mail and the commercials that you're seeing. Call now. There's Medicare plans available in your area. Those are usually for Advantage plans, okay? Now, the Advantage plans work very differently. They're usually a $0 premium. So usually you don't have to pay anything each month to have an Advantage plan, but you pay as you go. So that's more like an employer plan, where if you have an x-ray or an MRI or a surgery or a hospital stay, you're gonna pay copays when you see the doctor. You're gonna pay for every medical event. So it's more pay as you go, okay? It also has some perks, like some dental, some vision, and some hearing perks, and it has the prescription coverage included. Okay, so you don't have to have a separate Part D drug plan. Usually the drug coverage is wrapped in that Advantage plan. So this is just a little bit of a refresher of kind of what original Medicare is, the 2 different directions you can go, and even within these 2 options, there's a few other options. So we're gonna kind of get into looking at a comparison on a chart of what are the prices of all of these different plans to help you decide which one would be the best route for you. Let's look at our chart here. I have a chart and I have a piece of paper because I want to kind of cover up all these numbers and just go through this one column at a time. So what we're going to look at is, first of all, original Medicare. We're going to look at original Medicare plus a G plan, which is a supplemental G plan, and a Part D drug plan. Then we're going to look at the original Medicare plus a supplemental N plan plus a Part D drug plan. Then we're going to look at the Medicare Advantage plan only. And then we're going to look at the MA, the Medicare Advantage plan with a Copay Protection plan. And we'll talk about what that is, okay? So first of all, let's look at this column, original Medicare. Now again, remember I said this isn't going to be your best decision because there's a lot of financial gaps with this and a lot of risk, okay? But what would it cost if you just went with original Medicare? So remember that Part A is probably going to be $0 for most of you. Part B is going to be at least $185, right? So these may not be exact numbers for you. You may have an IRMA. You may have to pay more. That's why you need to call us and talk to one of our guides to help you out with this. But this is just to give you a general idea. Most Americans are going to pay $185, okay? So you pay $185 for your original Medicare. That's Part A and Part B. And then you need a drug plan with that. So you have to add a Part D drug plan. Now let's talk about drug plans here, because the drug plan that you get is going to depend on what medications you're taking. So when you talk to someone who helps you out with this, you need a professional who knows what they're doing. They're going to ask you what medications you're taking. They should, and then we'll find out what medications you're taking, what dose you're on, what pharmacy you go to find you the best plan, because we want to make sure your medications are covered on formulary on whatever drug plan you have. Now the rates of these drug plans can range anywhere from $0 all the way up to, I've seen them as much as $120 a month. So it depends on what carrier you're with. It depends on mostly what medications you're on. So I have written drug plans for people for a $0 premium. It doesn't cost them anything except for what their medications cost, because they're either on no medicines or they're on generic tier 1 or tier 2 medications, like a generic blood pressure medication, maybe a generic statin, something like that. But what I'm telling you is your drug plan might be $0. It might be $28. It might be $57. It might be $100, depending on what medications you take. But for our example today, the base premium right now, the national average premium is $36.50. I left the 50 cents off for clean math, okay? So we're going to say the average drug plan is around $36, but remember, again, this could be less for you if you're not on any medications or you live in an area where there's a less expensive or a $0 drug plan, okay? But the average price right now nationwide is $36 for a Part D drug plan, okay? So when we add this in monthly, we're paying $185 for our Medicare Part A and B. We're paying $36 a month for our Part D drug plan to go with it, so you have prescription coverage. And that's going to bring us to about $221 a month, okay? Which would be about $2,652 a year. Now, something important to know, if you take Social Security already, you're getting Social Security, they'll take this right out of your Social Security check. So they're going to take your Part B premium, the $185 out of your check, and then they can set it up, whoever you work with, hopefully it's us, to set up your plans where that Part D premium comes out of your Social Security check as well. If you're not taking Social Security, then you'll have to get a bill and you'll have to pay these, okay? So that's about what we're looking at for just original Medicare only. Now remember, on this chart, we're just looking at what it actually costs monthly and yearly to have the plan. We're not talking at all about out-of-pocket costs yet, doctor's costs, expenses, risk that you have. We're going to look at that in our next example, okay? So this is just what you would pay each month to have Medicare only and a drug plan, okay? So let's move over and let's start talking about if we added a supplemental plan. So let's look at if we added the most comprehensive supplemental plan that's out there right now, the most popular, which is a G plan, okay? So we're going to look at, this would be original Medicare, and we're going to add a supplemental G plan, and we'd have to add a Part D drug plan as well. Now you'll see on my example here, the top, we have 185 on all these columns. The reason is you have to have A and B to go any of these directions. So that's one thing they all have in common. You have to have A and B. You have to be enrolled in original Medicare to go any of these routes. So you're all going to pay at least that 185, if not higher if you have an IRMA, okay? All right, let's direct back here to our column where we're going to look at original Medicare with a G plan and a Part D plan. So we know we're paying $185 a month for that Part B, at least, right? We're going to put in, again, $36 for a drug plan. Again, yours may be less, it may be more, okay? And then we also have to add in, for the G plan, what's the cost of that? Now this again is something that can vary. I've seen G plans as low as $120 in some areas, but I've seen them as high as $200, $220 in other areas. So what a G plan is going to cost you each month does depend on where you live, what part of the country you're in, your age, if you're male or female, that can matter sometimes. But the average price right now is between $150 and $180. Now, every time I say that in a video, a lot of you comment, mine's way more expensive, right? I live in Florida, mine's $220, or hey, I'm in the West Coast, mine's $200. So yeah, they could be more, and they could be a lot less depending on where you live. So for this example, I'm going to go a little higher than normally. Normally, I would say $150 for a G plan, but I'm going to say $170, okay? Because that's what a lot of you give us feedback. These rates have gone up a little bit. So here we are looking at original Medicare, $185 a month. Add a drug plan, we're taking the national average of $36 a month. And then for a G plan, we're going to take the premium of about $170 a month to be realistic there, okay? So this is going to add up to about $391 a month, or about $4,692 a year. And you might be like, wow, that's a lot. That's almost, $5,000 compared to original Medicare. But in our next slide, we're going to talk about what your out-of-pocket's going to be and what you pay on top of that. This is very comprehensive. So you're getting very comprehensive plan for under $5,000 a year, okay? So we'll talk about that more. But that's pretty much the column with the original Medicare, G plan, and a Part D. All right, let's move on over here to original Medicare with a supplemental N plan and a Part D drug plan. Now, you might not know, what's the difference between a G plan and an N plan? Well, it's how many gaps it covers, okay? So there's 6 gaps in Medicare. Pretty much the G plan is going to cover 5 out of 6 of those gaps. And then the N plan is just a step down. It's going to cover 4 out of 6 of those gaps. We'll talk about what those are, but pretty much you're going to have to still pay the $257 Part B deductible, and then you're going to have to pay a copay when you go to the doctor, maybe $20 for an office visit, up to $50 for an emergency room, and there's something called excess charges, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So the supplemental N plan is still really good coverage, very comprehensive coverage. It's just not quite as comprehensive as the G plan, okay? But some people do it because they like to take advantage of it's a little lower premium. So to have that original Medicare with an N plan and a Part D drug plan, we'd be looking at, of course, $185 for our Part B, our original Medicare. And then let's add in that $36 for the Part D drug plan, okay? Again, that could be less, could be more. And then I'd say the average rate right now, we're going to put $120 here for an N plan, okay? Again, I've seen N plans as low as like $90. I've seen them a little bit higher, but usually in some areas you can save almost up to $30, $40, $50 a month on an N compared to a G, okay? So with our example here, using the 120 as kind of the national average, you'd be looking at about $341 a month to have this set up. And that's about $4,092 a year. So you do see it adds up, right? Saving almost $50 a month in this example, and that saves you $600 a year, okay? We'll tell you too, there's some states, there's about 8 states where that excess charge that doctors could charge, they're not even allowed to charge it. So you would definitely want to take advantage of an N plan if you live in one of those states, okay? Now let's go on here. These were our supplemental columns. Okay, again, you pay a monthly premium for those supplemental plans, but let's look at the other direction, which are Advantage plans, okay? So now Advantage plans, you also have to have Medicare Part A and B. So we got that charge of at least $185 for original Medicare, but most Advantage plans have the Part D prescription drug coverage encased in the Advantage plan. So you don't have to get an extra drug plan, okay? You don't have to pay extra for a drug plan. Your drug coverage is included in the Advantage plan. Now, most of these Advantage plans, they could be a small premium of like maybe $10 or $20, but for the most part, I think every Advantage plan I've helped people with and I've signed people up for, they're $0 a month. So you don't have to pay anything to have the actual Advantage plan. So $0. Now that doesn't mean it's free because these work very differently. Instead of paying a monthly premium, these Advantage plans you pay as you go. So when you need, the x-ray, the CAT scan, the MRI, the hospital stay, the doctor's visit, you're paying out of pocket, a copay, co-insurance, deductibles, all that every time you need medical care. So this again is just the price to just have the plan. Okay, so we'd be looking at $185. That's pretty much all you're paying a month for the Advantage plan because you're going to have it at $0 premium and we don't have to add a drug plan. So just to have that monthly, we'd be looking at about $185 a month and $2,220 a year. Now you may say, wow, Erika, that's a lot less expensive than those supplemental plans, but we're going to get into what you have to pay out of pocket, the max out of pocket, and the risk there. And these could end up being a lot more costly than these supplemental plans, okay? All right, let's look at the last option. And this is one that I said a lot of people may not be familiar with, okay? But this is a Medicare Advantage plan and a Copay Protection plan. So Copay Protection plans are also called hospital indemnity plans, okay? So what this means is it's an extra small side plan that we can help enroll you in, and they're very expensive. Inexpensive. They're very inexpensive. Not expensive, inexpensive. They can be anywhere from $15 to maybe $30, $40 a month, okay? But what they do is they protect you from the copays, exactly what it sounds like. So with an Advantage plan, as I said, as you get care, you're going to pay as you go. You're going to pay these copays. And one of the costliest copays when you're on an Advantage plan is if you go in the hospital. So depending on what Advantage plan you're on, it could cost you anywhere from $200 to $400 a night if you're in the hospital. And that can be up to maybe 7, even 8 days, okay? So if you think about it, you go in the hospital and you got $350 and you have to pay that every night for 7 nights. That's gonna add up, right? That's like $2,200, $2,300. So this is an actual side plan that we can get you that's very inexpensive, and it can help cover those copays and protect you from those copays and a large bill if you go in the hospital if you're on an Advantage plan, okay? Now, to get a Copay Protection plan or a hospital indemnity plan, those do, again, depend on your age and your zip code and all of that. And it also depends on how much coverage you want. So what we usually do when we work with someone, if we're signing them up, enrolling them in an Advantage plan, where the copay is, okay, you have to pay $300 a night for the first 7 nights you're in a hospital, we can go in and customize that Copay Protection plan and choose, okay, we want 7 days of coverage and we want it for $300 each day. So it matches up with what the copays would be on the Advantage plan. There's also other riders we can add. We can add an ambulance rider. If you have an Advantage plan, you're probably going to pay $250, maybe $275 for an ambulance ride. We could get an ambulance coverage on that Copay Protection. If you have to go in a skilled nursing facility, you would have copays with an Advantage plan. We could get those covered as well. So you can kind of customize these, but they're really nice because if you're gonna have an Advantage plan, you're paying $0 anyways for that plan. You might as well have a little bit of extra coverage for $20, $30 a month that's gonna help you if you end up in a hospital or have a serious medical event, okay? So anyways, we know that we gotta pay $185, right? Just to have Medicare A and B. This one, we don't have to have a drug plan, because again, the drug coverage is going to be wrapped into the Advantage plan. But to have this Copay Protection plan, I'm going to say about $30 a month is what we're going to pay for that, okay? Because $30 would probably get you that hospital coverage of probably about 7 days, around $300 a night. Okay, so we're going to add this up. We're paying $185 plus $30, so we're looking at about $215 a month to have that Medicare Advantage plan with the Copay Protection added, coming in about $2,580 a year. Now again, these are just our base rates of what we're paying each month to have these plans. Now let's look at what our out-of-pocket costs are going to be. Hey, if you found this video helpful, do us a favor. Go give us a like. We always appreciate it. And subscribe so you don't miss out on any of those future videos. And leave us a comment. We'd love to hear what you have to say. We love to answer any questions you have. That's what it's here for. So drop us a comment below. Okay, so we just looked at the 5 different kind of options and routes you could go with Medicare plans and what the monthly cost would be just to have those plans, or what the annual cost would be. So let's review each one of these, but this time we're also going to talk about the max out of pocket, or like your possible out of pocket expenses on top of those prices and rates that we looked at on the other chart. So first, let's start with original Medicare, okay? Just original Medicare. So again, we said it's about $221 a month, and that was because we're paying $185 for Medicare, plus we got to throw a drug plan on there. So it was around $2,652 a year, okay? Now, what is your out-of-pocket cost, or let's call it just your max out-of-pocket, worst-case scenario, with original Medicare? It's actually unlimited. I can't even give you a number on that because we have all those different financial gaps, but the biggest one is that 20% that you're responsible for. Medicare only pays 80%. So if you don't have something like a supplemental plan or Advantage plan to help fill these gaps, you're going to have to pay 20% of any medical bill. What if you have a heart attack? What if you have cancer? You have to go in the hospital and you have a huge $300,000, $400,000 bill, you would have to pay 20%. And that's unlimited. So really, I can't tell you what your out-of-pocket would be. I would tell you it would not be good if you have huge medical bills, right? So that's kind of where we will be with Original Medicare. So not the best decision to just stick with Original Medicare. I know it looks like a cheap monthly price tag, but there's a lot of big financial risks that come with it, okay? All right, let's go down and look at our if we stay with Original Medicare plus a G plan, so that's a supplemental plan, remember, a G plan, and we added the Part D drug plan. All right, so we had added up for this. The monthly cost was about $391, and remember that was what we're paying for Part B, $185. We used an average of about $170 for the G plan, and then we added in our Part D drug plan, okay? So that came into about $4,692 a year, so a little bit over $4,500 a year. But now let's look at if you had that supplemental G plan and your drug plan, what would your out-of-pocket costs be? Well, of course, you got to pay for your medications, right? So I can't really give you an estimate on your medications. It depends on what drugs you're on. So you got to pay for your medications. And then outside of that, when you have a supplemental plan, remember, you can go to any doctor that accepts Original Medicare. If Medicare pays, then the supplemental plan has to pay. And it covers 5 out of those 6 gaps of Medicare. So the only thing you're responsible for, in addition to what we're paying to have the plans, is the $257 Part B deductible. That's the only gap that's not covered. So you literally pay that $4,692 a year, or whatever your monthly premium is. And then on top of that, you pay $257. After you pay that $257, everything else is covered for the rest of the year. So you see, yes, this is a higher monthly and yearly price tag, but overall, you're going to spend less out of pocket because you have very comprehensive coverage. All right, now let's go down and look at that N plan, okay? So if we had Original Medicare with an N plan, and we had the Part D drug plan. So we're going to have, we figured out that was going to about $341 a month, okay? That was the $185 for Part B. We took about $120 for the N plan, and then we took the drug plan, okay, about $36. Now that came in just over $4,000 a year, $4,092 for a year. So you see, we save about $600 going from the G plan to the N plan. Okay, now tell me, you're like, hey, Erika, tell me again, I don't remember. What's the difference between a G plan and an N plan? Well, pretty much where the G plan covers 5 out of 6 of the gaps, the N plan covers 4 out of 6 of those gaps, okay? So the things you would be responsible for out of pocket is also that $257, so you'd have to pay the $257 for your Part B deductible. And then the difference with the N plan is with a G plan, you don't pay any copays when you go to the doctor. But with an N plan, you would have to pay up to $20 for a doctor's visit. And you could pay up to $50 for an emergency room visit. Usually they waive that if you end up admitted, okay? So that is one thing, you have to pay copays when you go to the doctor. And then there is something called excess charges. So that brings us to this 15%. So what that means is, that's one of the gaps. One of the gaps is that excess charge, 15%. And that means there's a very small portion of doctors that don't just accept Medicare assignment. They charge 15% over an excess charge of the Medicare allowed amount. Now, if a doctor would charge that 15%, you would be responsible for that. You would be on the hook for that. But here's the thing. If you live in certain states, let's see if I can do them here, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Rhode Island. If you live in any of those states, it's illegal for doctors to charge excess charge. So you don't even have to worry about it. So hey, go with the N plan if you live in one of those states. And everywhere else in the rest of the country, very few doctors do it. I heard it's like 97, it's less than like 3 or 4% of doctors who actually charge that excess charge. So you could get around this. If you're going to have a surgery or a big procedure, just ask the doctor, do you accept Medicare assignment or do you charge excess charges? And you could kind of dodge that. So that's really not a huge deal. which makes that N plan very comprehensive and a pretty good choice if you can't afford a G plan, okay? All right, so let's roll on down to these Advantage plans and look at these. Now this gets tricky. And we don't think Advantage plans are bad, right? Our founder, Marvin, he says, and I really love this, he says the supplemental plans are exceptional insurance and the Advantage plans are acceptable insurance, okay? So when we start talking about these Advantage plans, they're definitely gonna be a better option than just sticking with original Medicare up here and having all the risk of that 20%. So the Advantage plan we talked about, again, is gonna be $185 a month, right? Because we're paying for that Part A and Part B, we gotta have original Medicare. So that came up to about $2,220 a year, okay? Now, what's your out-of-pocket going to be with the Advantage plans? And this is where the expenses can get big. This is where you can run into some issues with the Advantage plans. Now, depending on what kind of plan you're on, you have some limitations, okay? So first of all, we have networks with these plans. You got to worry about, is your doctor in network or out of network? You don't have to worry about that with the supplemental plans. You can go to any doctor in the country that accepts original Medicare, okay? Now, Advantage plans, they're local plans. So you got to stay in your network, stay in your local area. So if you're traveling or on vacation and something happens, maybe you're a snowbird, you need to go get some care, they may not cover that unless it's emergency care because you're not in your network, you're not in your local area, okay? And now they come in lots of different options of plans. There's an HMO, which is the most restrictive. There's a PPO, which is a little bit more flexible. And there's an HMO POS, which lands somewhere kind of in the middle of those two. But your max out of pocket on most of these plans, if you have an HMO, which again, you have to stay in network with in-network doctors or they're not going to pay anything. The max out of pocket is usually between $3,000 to $5,000 a year, okay? So now we have to look at this. This is in addition to what you're paying, just to have Medicare. Okay, now the PPO plans could be a little bit higher. So the PPO plans, they could be anywhere from $5,000 up to $10,000 max out of pocket. Because remember, when you're using an Advantage plan, even though it's $0 a month, you're gonna pay every time you need care, whether that's a doctor's visit, a MRI, a CAT scan, blood drawn, lab stuff, you're in the hospital. So you're paying a lot more than just that $185 a month for this, okay? So if we actually look at this, let's say you're on a PPO plan and you max it out and your max out of pocket is like even $5,000. You're paying for your Medicare anyways. You take $2,220 plus $5,000, we're upwards of $7,220, right? If your max out of pocket's $8,000 or $10,000, it could be even more if you max out your plan. So that's where we want you to understand some of these. I talk about the commercials and the stuff coming in your mailbox and the phone calls you're getting. They can make the Advantage plans sound appealing because, hey, they're $0 premium. The drug package is included. And they have perks. They do have a dental, vision, and a hearing perk. They also have a wellness perk. But what you don't know is that there are restrictions with the doctors you go to. You get into the red tape of those prior authorizations and things like that. And then you can have some pretty high max out of pockets if you have a big medical event and you end up maxing out your plan, okay? And then lastly, we have the option that I said a lot of you may not know about, and that's the Advantage plan. So we're taking the scenario we just looked at, but we're adding in an inexpensive product, another plan called a Copay Protection plan, okay? So we came up with, remember, about $215 a month because we were paying for Medicare, which is $185, and we took the average cost of about $30 for one of these hospital indemnity or Copay Protection plans. So come out to about $215 a month, which is just a little over $2,500 a year. Okay. Now, how does this change things, Erika? I'm still got an Advantage plan, right? I still got that high max out of pocket. Yes, but the Copay Protection is going to give you a little bit of relief if you end up with a big medical event or you spend a week or two in the hospital, okay? So we're still going to be on that Advantage plan, which is going to be an HMO or a PPO. You're still going to have that max out of pocket of thousands and thousands of dollars. But what this does is, again, remember, it protects you from the copays. So you pay that $30 a month. And if you do land in the hospital, hey, let's say you're in the hospital and your Advantage plan makes you pay $300 a night for the first 7 days. That's $2,100. But because we have that Copay Protection coverage, they're going to cover you on that. They're going to pay those copays for you. So you're getting that $2,100 back. Where you have that back in your pocket. You don't have to pay that much, okay? So that's where it's going to give you some protection from these large max out of pockets of thousands and thousands of dollars, okay? All right, now let's talk about the last group of people that have an option. It's not for everybody, but I told you I have a bonus option here at the end for a small group of people. So let's look at that. All right, so let's look at this bonus pathway that's only going to be for a small group of you. So that's going to be for retired military, people who have VA benefits, or who are retired federal employees. So there's a plan called an MA only plan. Okay, so MA only Medicare Advantage plan. So it's a Medicare Advantage plan, but we call it MA only because it doesn't have Part D drug coverage included, because this is for people who don't need it. Okay, so if you're one of these categories of people, first of all, thank you for your service. We appreciate you. But TRICARE. So TRICARE is retired military, and TRICARE for life. So these people are one of the small groups that may have an opportunity with one of these MA only plans. I'll tell you about it. Then we have people who have VA benefits, okay? So VA or CHAMP VA, this may be beneficial to you. And then the last one is called FEHB, which are people who are retired federal workers, okay? That's the insurance they have. Now, these are all great insurance. You guys have worked hard. You put your service in and your time in to have these. But there is something called an MA only plan that, because you have creditable drug coverage through these other insurance carriers, you don't need the drug coverage, okay? Medicare requires people to have creditable drug coverage, so that means it's got to be the same or better than the Medicare Part D drug plans. But people who have TRICARE, VA, FEHB, they have creditable coverage through their plans for drugs, so they don't need that. So we can do what's called a MA only, or a Medicare Advantage plan for them. And it's kind of cool because these have what's called a Part B give back, okay? So what a Part B give back is I told you guys to have any of these plans, right, you have to have original Medicare A and B. Well, that Part B costs most people $185 a month. So what we can do, and each case is unique, right? There's a lot of kind of rules with some of these that you have to work around. So if you're one of these people who are military or retired or FEHB, give us a call and we can talk about your certain plan and see if you would qualify for this. But you can go on one of these MA only plans, and it works and coordinates with either TRICARE, VA, FEHB, and it has this Part B give back. And what that is it's money that they credit you towards this $185 a month. So it's a way where you can get some extra perks. You can get that dental, vision, hearing, maybe a gym membership. And some people, I've seen them get upwards of $150 back towards this Part B, okay? So all they're paying is like $35 now out of their Social Security check, or that's all they're paying because of the give back. And the plans are all different, depends on what it is. Some plans will give you back $80, some will give you $120, some will give you back $150. But a lot of people will like to add one of these Medicare Advantage plans without the drug coverage to their military or their retired FEHB benefits. So if you fall in this category, definitely give us a call. And again, we can help you out and kind of talk through your unique situation. So hopefully you have a little bit of a better understanding of what these different Medicare plans are, what they could cost, and the potential max out of pocket or risk to you financially. So again, everybody's case is unique. Don't go it alone. Call experts like our guides at Medicare School. We'd be happy to walk you through this and help you out. And if you want to learn more and go a little bit more in depth on what those supplemental plans are versus Advantage plans, check out this video right here.